As we continue, today our presentation will be developing cultural competency, lessons learned from a Philippines study program, and our presenters are members of the ESP Global Relations Committee. Peggy Compton, State Specialist, Natural Resources Institute, University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension. Christy Fitzpatrick, retired 4-H professional from Colorado State University. Mark Nelson, Extension Professor, Utah State University. And Celina Wille, Extension Assistant Professor, Utah State University Extension. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we start with our presenters. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the National ESP site along with other webinars that will be offered in the future. All of our participants are on mute during the presentation. However, if you would like to ask questions or make statements during the webinar, please use the chat box. And at the end, we will have some time for our presenters to answer questions that you post in the chat box. Following the webinar, you'll receive an email for an evaluation survey, and we'll also put that link in the chat box. Without further ado, I will turn the program over to our presenters from the Global Relations Committee.
Well, thank you very much, Jeanette, for that introduction. And hello, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. Today you will be hearing about a professional development experience that we participated in last month when we traveled to the Philippines. We will begin with a brief overview of the program and the country and the university that was host to our experience. We will then share specific program objectives and learning outcomes and how we achieved those objectives and outcomes. We will share preliminary evaluation data and close with some ideas on how and why you might get involved in something similar. Now over to Celina for the first of our 3 program overviews.
Hello everybody, I'm Celina Wille from Utah State University, and we'll briefly explain what the program was all about. This was a 9-day international extension professional development program in the Philippines that took place March 5th through the 14th for a total of 13 days outside the USA, counting travel time. The overall goal of the IEPD, for short, was to expand participants' knowledge of the extension profession. This was not a program on how to do international work. We were there primarily to learn and not to be extension consultants. However, we were invited to present a symposium about the extension model in the USA and to provide highlights of our own program areas in extension. The program idea was developed by members of the ESP Global Relations Committee, but because it needed a host organization, the Utah IOTA chapter took on that role with me leading the efforts. For coordinating registration and all other program logistics, I worked with both the Office of Global Engagement at Utah State University and the Office of International Linkages at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños. The program planning process from design to execution took about a year, and 12 professionals from 4 states traveled to the Philippines. We had representatives from Colorado State, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Utah State University. The program included a variety of presentations and unique site visits to give participants a historical and cultural overview of the Philippines, expose them to the country's norms, foods, and customs, and to provide a primer on social, economic, and political issues that sort of set the context for this study tour experience. The program focused on learning from organizations that address the country's extension programming priorities, including a half-a-day meeting hosted by ATI, which is the Agricultural Training Institute in the capital city of Manila. ATI is an agency of the Philippine government under the Department of Agriculture that is responsible for training agricultural extension workers and their clientele. From Manila, the program moved to Los Baños, which is about an hour south, to a campus of the University of the Philippines known as UPLB, where we spent 7 days. The program included cultural experiences such as sightseeing city tour in Manila and an excursion to Villa Escudero, where we visited a museum, watched a cultural show, and ate at a waterfall restaurant where we tried unique Filipino dishes. And you can see in the slide pictures of some of these places that we visited, specifically the waterfall restaurant, which was a very awesome experience. Other activities included were a campus tour, a cooking demonstration, visits to local farmers markets, and to silk and woodcraft markets. We didn't pass on the many opportunities to try along the way many of the local food specialties, like halo halo that you can see on that picture, the big glass with white on the top and brown on the bottom. That's halo halo. Also buko pie, which is a coconut-based pie, plus many unique dishes and snacks that our hosts so eagerly wanted to share with us. While there, and you can also see in that picture, a couple of us took on the challenge of trying balut, which is a fertilized developing egg embryo that is boiled and eaten from the shell. Balut is commonly sold as street food in the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries. In summary, the program gave us a good balance of lectures, experiential learning activities, and one-on-one time with our local hosts to create connections during our immersion experience.
And now I will give you just a little bit of background on the Philippines and the University of the Philippines Baños, just to set the stage for a little more context of where we were. The Republic of the Philippines is a country consisting of many islands, more than 7,000. It stretches more than 1,100 miles from north to south. That's not quite as far as from Maine to Miami, which is 1,700 miles. The capital of the Philippines is Manila, one of the most densely populated cities in the world, with over 111,000 people per square mile. The total population of the Philippines in 2018 was just under 107 million, about 1/3 the population of the US that same year. The official languages of the Philippines are Tagalog and English. Many government meetings are held in English and public schools teach in English. So that was great for us as learners and participants in the activities while in the Philippines, since we did not have any language barriers. However, we also learned that there are more than 100 languages spoken throughout the country by ethno-linguistic groups. They are considered that because language forms the major basis for the ethnic group. This abundance of languages spoken had many implications for their extension system and for doing community research and outreach. The rich history of the Philippines, and especially connections to Spain and the United States, were evident in many places, but none more moving than the Manila American Cemetery, which is shown there in the photo with the white crosses. It contains the largest number of graves of our military dead of World War II, a total of 17,202 lives lost in operations in New Guinea and the Philippines. A presentation on the first day of our program covered the socioeconomic and political history of the Philippines. I was surprised by the many ties to the US, including the similarities in our federal government structure, with the presidential position as a 6-year term and a single term limit. One of the most interesting and unique things I thought was hearing a video recording of their president shortly after he was elected, outlining his vision for the future of the Philippines. And what was especially interesting was how he moved fluidly between speaking in Spanish and the Philippine language of Tagalog throughout his speech. And now a little bit about the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, which is where we spent the majority of our time, even though we started and ended our trip in the Metro Manila area. The UPLB is a publicly funded academic research and extension institution, and it's one of 8 universities in the University of the Philippines system. UPLB is a rural campus about 40 miles south of Manila. And when they say rural, it is not the same as what I would consider rural, where I am housed, which is a university in a small rural agricultural town with a similar student body size as the UPLB. But our campus is literally only a mile from a 4-lane highway. Not the case for UPLB. I was convinced that after miles and miles of traveling on a windy, narrow road in our vans, that we could not possibly be headed to a university. But we did eventually get there to the very large campus of more than 13,000 acres that it was home to the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. There is a strong agriculture and extension presence at UPLB, which is why it was the perfect host for our professional development experience. Very interesting to many of us was hearing about their master's degree and PhD degrees in extension education, and that those are degrees that are offered through their College of Public Affairs. With that, back to Celina.
Right. Our main program objective was to learn about extension work in the Philippines in the areas of nutrition, family consumer science, youth development, agriculture, and environmental sustainability. The two learning outcomes for this program objective were to gain different perspectives of extension work and their application, and to increase knowledge on extension methodology that is used in the Philippines and practices that may be appropriate and applicable in our workplace. I will turn the time to Christy now from Colorado State to talk about something new that she learned about extension. And after Christy, we will each take turns to speak about our personal experiences.
Good morning. Because my career has been in youth development and 4-H, I was especially interested to learn about youth development work in the Philippines. My overall impression was that youth are involved in programs with specific purposes. So educational attainment, improved nutrition, family gardens, disaster relief, rather than the kind of programs we might see here with like after-school childcare or something like that. I was especially excited to visit a country that had a 4-H programs to look at some of the similarities and differences to see what ideas might be applicable here. One caveat I'll throw in is that there are a lot of details about this program that are kind of hard to unearth, much like it would be in the US if you just visited one place. So there are undoubtedly things I didn't interpret exactly right. Two pieces of context for the 4-H program. First of all, the Philippines is a very young country. More than a third of the population is younger than 15 and 60% is 30 and under. So there are a lot of young people to feed and a lot to find jobs for. Many children grow up far from services, and youth opportunities are spread unequally across the country, concentrated near cities and universities in the local communities called barangays, which are politically well connected. Poverty and a lack of hope for the future leads to youth disengagement, gang membership, and even to joining insurgency movements. So you can see the photo that was near a local high school about saying no to insurgency. Secondly, the national government recognizes a big obstacle to a food secure Philippines is the lack of new young farmers. As your rural farmers start to practice new techniques and make some money, their children attend school and then take their new skills off to the cities, no longer interested in the hard, low-paying labor on a traditional farm. The National Department of Ag has tasked the Agricultural Training Institute with glamorizing agriculture to entice young people to enter ag careers and meet the national goal of increased productivity and profitability for farmers and fishers. And one of the tools they use is their 4-H program. One legacy of the American colonization period is the land-grant university model. And in 1952, the beginning of the 4-H program, U.S. National 4-H has been involved in the program since its beginning. And recently, ATI has strengthened the program, although their staff is always in short supply. Some of the similarities, the 4-H's are head, heart, hands, and health. As with the original 4-H in the US, youth learn new ag technologies and STEM technologies and practices and transfer them to less developed areas. And 4-H teaches what the Philippines call governance skills, such as leadership, teamwork, organizational skills, entrepreneurship, collaboration, just as the US 4-H program does. But some differences. One target audience of 4-H in the Philippines is out-of-school youth ages 15, although we got some information last night that it's 10, to age 30. Young people most likely to be targeted by insurgencies and those most needing empowerment and career options. In-school youth are also members. 4-H projects primarily focused on agriculture teach not just how to grow things, but how to design value-added products, use new technology, do marketing, determine profitability, and teach and mentor others. Sometimes 4-Hers are known as agripreneurs. Like American 4-Hers, they develop confidence, connection, and recognition through conferences and trainings, contests, and competitions. If you look at the 4-H Club of the Philippines Facebook page, you'll see their prize-winning videos on the importance of ag and why people should want to be farmers. 4-H helps to make the case that agriculture is a professional career and demonstrates that applying good business practice and innovative methods will make agriculture a good way to make a living. It provides training and even sends many youth abroad to study ag methods, particularly to Japan. So my observation raised some questions. Could we target part of her 4-H program to older, possibly out of school youth to connect them to ag and STEM programs? We need young farmers too. Is there something we could be doing with the demographic between the ages of 18 and 24? We have collegiate 4-H, but what about youth who are not in a 4-year program? Could 4-H offer continuing mentorship to young people after they age out of the current program? For example, the Philippines 4-H Volunteer Leaders Association is actually an alumni group that stays involved with the program. Could we expand skills training to youth who can't attend college as part of our project work? Seeing how long-term engagement leads to positive outcomes, does it make sense to keep youth in structured programs longer? This experience led me to think about how to expand our definition of positive development and who we could or should reach with the 4-H program.
Part of my work in USU Extension is directing the Latino outreach portion of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP-Ed. So Latinos in Utah are a very vulnerable population with many documented health disparities. And because of my work in nutrition education, I paid special attention to an extension strategy called Bidani that was actually developed by the College of Human Ecology at UPLB. The mission of the college is to develop programs for research, training, and community service to improve the quality of life for everybody. And it is the first college in Asia that offers a degree program in food and nutrition planning. The College of Human Ecology at UPLB conceptualized Bidani, which is a nutrition improvement model or extension strategy that was originally funded by the World Health Organization and the United Nations in 1978. Bidani is an acronym that stands for the Barangay Integrated Development Approach for Nutrition Improvement. This extension strategy has been so successful for the past 44 years that it was adopted as a component of the Philippine Plan of Action for Nutrition at the national level. The main aim of Bidani is to build the capacities of local governments to integrate nutrition into local development plans. It is a community-based approach of planning that involves many actors to prioritize activities. It is also a long-term, integrated, and holistic approach in developing and empowering the rural poor in the Philippines. This extension program model is based on the principle that development plans and programs can only be meaningful and sustainable if they are responsive and reflective of the actual conditions and needs of the communities. The main goals of Bidani are to achieve poverty alleviation, good health, food security, and good governance for the general well-being of families and their communities. This approach is very different than how we work in nutrition education in Utah. There is great value in Bidani's community-based strategy that integrates long-term and sustainability elements that we can learn from. Mark is now going to speak on what he learned about an extension strategy UPLB successfully applied in their agriculture program.
Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you about agriculture in the Philippines. We were able to spend quite a bit of time in the College of Agriculture and learn about several of their programs, and I want to talk about two of those. We were able to visit with Dr. Davidi. He is a professor emeritus at UPLB, and he gave a presentation on the Farmer Scientist Training Program, and this has been very successful. He said that when he started his extension work in 1994, he found the farmers were only producing low yields for their families. He conceived a program based on the premises that the farmers are smart individuals who can become scientists who implement and design experiments on their own farms. This program is made up of 3 different phases. The first phase, farmers do research with scientists in the field, which include fertilizer trials, intercropping, and land preparation. Phase 2, farmers adopt the scientific methods and technologies and learn phase 1 into their own farms, such as new high-yielding varieties of corn. Phase 3 requires farmers to teach untrained fellow farmers the new technology. And you can see in this slide on the left, the difference in the corn yields by coming in with some new varieties that tried out on different farms. And that's very impressive and really shows an impact of what this program did in the Philippines. Another agriculture program that is working very successfully in the Philippines is the International Rice Research Institute, or IRRI. Dr. Josh Cobb is a rice breeding specialist from the United States that's currently working over in the Philippines. And Dr. Cobb gave us a good overview of how important rice is in the world. Over 50% of the world eats rice and makes their living from producing rice. And he reminded us that we have 9 billion people to feed in the world, and over half of them eat rice 4 or 5 times every day. The varieties of rice being used are an average of 28 years old. Because of this, yields are not increasing. The job of IRRI is to come up with new varieties, which in turn will increase rice production in the world and in turn feed more people. Dr. Cobb's current funding is from a $23 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Back to you, Peggy.
My extension work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is in natural resources. So I was especially excited to hear from the UPLB faculty in the School of Environmental Science and Management, which they often just referred to as CSAM. The presentations there did not disappoint, nor did the natural settings of this island country and the hike that we were able to take in the McKeeling Rainforest, which is managed by the university. Who knew that leeches lived on the plants in the rainforest and could latch onto you as you walked past? But that's a story for another time. So back to the presentations that we heard. Some things that stood out right away were interdisciplinary initiatives and the urgency with which they were acting on the issues of climate change and mitigation, natural disaster planning and management, and water security. Much of the work was coming through and being done through the Interdisciplinary Studies Center for Water, which is a virtual center with 72 faculty members from across campus collaborating on water security issues that included disciplines as far-reaching as water-related disasters, water security in agriculture, clean water and sanitation, water-related technologies, and gender, culture, and community. The sense of urgency is better understood with some of the statistics that are in the slide in the bottom left-hand corner. In the Philippines, there are 55 deaths per day due to unsafe sewerage and sanitation practices. 14% of Filipinos, or about 15 million people, do not have a safe drinking water source, and 5 of the 10 deadliest storms in history have occurred since 2006. And also conveying that urgency is headlines from Manila, such as this one pictured in the center of the screen from March of 2019. Starting from a 150 million liter per day deficit of water in March, it rose to 350 million liter day deficit by late June when they entered the dry season. So that was in March, and then through June it got worse, and it wasn't until September that they had consistent water supply restored to all of Metro Manila. What are the answers? They are building more water treatment plants to treat surface water and one large lake near Manila in particular. But if you read about that lake, it has known toxic pollutants. So the water treatment is not only necessary, but very expensive and difficult. They are also building additional dams to create reservoirs on the rivers for drinking water purposes, and also considering desalination of ocean water.
Another set of objectives that we had was to expand our views on global linkages and interdependence of the US with the Philippines and Southeast Asia, on the issues of food security policy and research. But I think probably our learning outcome, our understanding of how international issues affect daily life is probably the best description, because we learned so much more than just the food aspects. As we heard from the ag and extension scientists and learned about environmental programs, disaster response, efforts to engage communities in national efforts, we came to see that food security is just one part of a web of political and economic and educational connections between the US, the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and the world. And of course, traveling during the expansion of the COVID-19 pandemic certainly brought us face to face with ideas that international interdependence really exists, that viruses know no boundaries, and that supply chains and environmental impacts extend all around the world. We were introduced to Philippine industries, technologies, and exports. In the US, we're probably not aware that when we buy a computer made in China, the internal electronics were probably manufactured in the Philippines. Electronic components, machinery, medical equipment make up almost 2/3 of Philippines exports. So then when we think of bananas, coconut, and tuna fish as our links to the Philippines, we don't recognize the sophistication of their industries. We also might not know that the voice on the phone when we call the call center or tech support is most likely speaking from one of those large buildings in the picture on the lower left, where there are huge international call center complexes. Peggy described to you the UPLB programs and research on environmental systems and management. As these industries produce more for global consumption, the local environmental costs such as polluted air and water, diminishing water resources, deforestation, and loss of agricultural land has to be studied, understood, and mitigated. And as she mentioned, in this island nation, this vulnerable island nation, the local impacts of global climate change on their crops and farms, fisheries, weather, and public safety are an ever-present part of everyday life, university programs, research, and government policies. Mark explained the work of ERIE and its research to reduce food insecurity and malnutrition in Asia and Africa. Rice is a great illustration of the linkages between food security, ag policy, and research. We probably won't forget that rice is a staple of 50% of the world, given the large mounds of it that are on our breakfast plates, lunch plates, dinner plates. The fact that the country doesn't produce enough rice to feed its people has health, political, and economic consequences. To provide cheaper food, President Duterte removed rice tariffs, resulting in a flood of cheaper imported rice. But this devastated the farmers and also moved them to accept the government modernization plans to improve their production, thus achieving several policy goals at once. Rice research helps to meet sustainable development goals of decreased hunger, more efficient and sustainable agriculture, local capacity building, and increased educational opportunity. This research is made possible by a network of scientists and governments from across the world, from non-government organizations and private funders. And it works not just to improve health, but economic prospects and sustainability. At UPLB, we became aware that the linkage between educational institutions. UPLB works with over 300 universities across the world, including in the US, and over 40% of their graduate students come from other countries, especially from across Southeast Asia. As you've heard, shared research and knowledge addresses many pieces of a more sustainable world. Visiting this part of the world would be life-changing at any time, but at this particular time of global pandemic, this opportunity to experience and discover our connections to this part of the world through the generous sharing of our Philippine hosts gave us a broader understanding to apply as our extension systems work to rebuild local and global trust and connection in a post-pandemic future.
Thanks, Christy. And continuing our thinking about global linkages, I'd just like to ask you if you've ever thought about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as related to your extension programming. I must admit I had not. So what are these goals? They are a call to action for all countries, poor, rich, or in the middle, to promote prosperity while protecting the planet. Ending poverty must go hand in hand with strategies that build economic growth and address the social needs, including education, health, social protection, and job opportunities, while tackling climate change and environmental protection. There were examples of the incorporation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in many aspects of the research, extension, and education that we heard about at UPLB. And that was very impressive and surprising to me, as I just had never thought about something so big and how it might or could possibly affect my local extension programming. Sometimes in the presentations we heard from the faculty, the UN goals were specifically referenced as a guidance to the work that they were doing. Other times it was more of a subtle relationship that they alluded to. In the College of Human Ecology, that barangay, local unit of government, specifically were developing plans to meet food security and nutrition goals. And they had model communities for talking to us and researching and showcasing model communities for sustainability and resilience. In the College of Ag and Food Science, the responses to climate change included improved irrigation, diversified crops, cropping and animal systems, urban gardening, and crop adaptability research. The food security requires a new generation of farmers, which also is part of this overall more comprehensive look at the way we do things, basing it on the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. In CSAM, the School of Environmental Science and Management that I talked about earlier, we heard so much about water security and finding solutions for resilient communities and creating nationally mandated community plans. All of this was closely tied together, and it had to do leading back to water security, but also the mitigation and coping with climate change and with the national disasters. So this was eye-opening and interesting to me. It opened my eyes to the true global community that we live in and our connections. The urgency in the need for climate change mitigation, for example, in this island country, made me think more about our attempts at climate change education and outreach here in Wisconsin Extension, and how slow it has been to make real progress. And hearing about their water security issues and the work being done to tackle these difficult issues made me appreciate our water systems and the availability that we have. We really do have, in Wisconsin anyway, plentiful water. However, it was interesting that just in the 12 of us who were traveling together and experiencing this program together in the Philippines, the water issues that we experience and that we program around in extension varied greatly from what I am doing and our situation here in Wisconsin compared to many of the colleagues who traveled in our group who were from Utah. So very different even within our country on the water security types of issues. With that, we are going to move on to our third program objective, and I believe Celina is going to tell us a little bit about this.
Yes. So this third program objective was to increase our cultural competency or our abilities to address the needs of culturally diverse audiences at home by both thinking global and acting local. To reach this objective, we anticipated 3 learning outcomes. The first one, to develop a deeper understanding of our own culture as distinct from others. The second one, to increase engagement with and a heightened awareness and appreciation of different cultures. And the third one, to increase our awareness and capacity to respond to needs of people with diverse backgrounds. Now Mark will illustrate a local program experience that brought to the forefront thinking about these learning outcomes, and then I will expand on other ways we reflected on them and assessed them.
Okay, so as part of our visit to the Philippines, each of us that came from the United States were asked to present what they called the U.S. extension model to the students and faculty. And it was advertised. We saw posters of our pictures of us up all over campus. And so a lot of people came to to listen to our presentations. We had over 150 students and faculty come, and each of us were asked to give a 15-minute presentation on one of the programs that we were currently conducting back in our states and counties. I decided that I would present on a program that I've been working on for the last 10 years called Controlling Ground Squirrels in Crop Ground. I gave my PowerPoint presentation and showed a lot of pictures. When I showed the picture of the dead squirrel that you can see up on the left side of your screen, there were a few gasps from the audience. And I have given this presentation many times, but when we turned it over to questions, they asked me a question that I'd never heard of before. After I heard the gasps, I thought that there would be somebody asking why we killed the poor defenseless animals, but I was surprised by what they asked. They asked if we'd been looking at collecting the dead squirrels so they could be used as a source of protein for food. I answered that I didn't think this would work because we kill most of the squirrels using poison. I talked to one of the professors after the program, and they told me that many people in the Philippines eat rats and squirrels and all sorts of different rodents just for food and just for a protein source. This was a real wake-up aha moment for me. I had never thought of that with all the work that I'd done on these squirrels of trying to eat any of them. And it made me realize that people from different cultures look at things much differently than you or I might look at things. And the other pictures on this slide just show we went to one of the markets, and this is how they market their meat, hanging up and stuff and just setting out there. A little concerned about how long it's been since any of that meat's been in a refrigerator, but everybody said that they come and buy my meat from that market. And the picture with the pigs with the head still on came from a farmer's market on a Saturday morning when we went there. And it really made me realize that you go to different cultures, you go to different countries, and people do things a lot different than what we do.
All right. So as a program closing activity, using a World Cafe technique, we reflected and identified the key program outcomes. One of them was that all these experiences would increase our awareness and cultural competencies and how they can be applied back home when working with diverse and emerging audiences in extension. The list that you see is a list of about 13 actions or indicators that we as a group identified to signal greater awareness and heightened cultural sensitivity. The first one, and they're not in any particular order, but just the idea of becoming more aware of other cultures. Ideas such as community scans or mapping would be valuable. When we become more aware of other cultures, we're curious to see who lives in our communities. Sometimes they're invisible to us because we don't know much about them. And so just exercises like this would show heightened cultural sensitivity. And so it also equips us to think and plan how we might be able to reach them. The second that I have on my list is assessing our own personal intercultural capacity and building on it. In this program, we use Bennett's model of intercultural sensitivity, where people may be at any stage of intercultural development in a continuum that goes from being ethnocentric, which means in denial, where we don't see cultural differences, but keep away from those that are different from us, to being ethnocentric, defensive, either stereotyping others and feeling superior, or the opposite, idealizing other cultures and putting ours down, to a stage of minimization where we insist we're more similar than different, and then to the next stage of acceptance where we recognize and value difference but don't judge, and to the final stage of adaptation and integration where we are always willing to learn about and connect with different communities. Other things on the list to show being more cultural competent are using available cultural expertise at our own institutions. And if we don't have that available, seeking informed community leaders. Also being braver in reaching out. And it's always kind of an intimidating thing to reach out to a group that we are not familiar with, that we don't know whether they will be open to working with us, but it takes that extra step to putting yourself out there. Collaborating, working with organizations that can serve as cultural guides. I have found that as an opportunity to expedite some programs because they act as door openers, and they could be our best partners to be able to ease ourselves into new audiences. Using participatory approaches in our programs to be able to get community buy-in, and also asking communities what they need, not inferring or telling them or assuming that our program works for everybody the way that we designed it. Removing prejudice and suspending judgment is another important skill. Sometimes we discount communities based on stereotypes or judgments that we've made, saying, well, you know, they're probably not interested, they're not interested in education, or this is not for them. So we limit ourselves when we have those attitudes. But when we remove prejudice and are willing to explore opportunities, we're more culturally sensitive. Also using active listening strategies when we seek to understand. Maybe we are out there trying to reach these communities, but we already have a plan and we sort of gloss over or are already planning a rebuttal in our minds of what we want to say rather than seeking to understand. Committing to building long-term relationships is also a very important skill because frankly, this takes time. Working with new communities where sometimes they feel that we may not only approach them because we want data and then we leave. So being prepared to work long-term is an important skill. And finally, learning to communicate in another language if needed. Sometimes it's not necessarily to speak fluently, but just to show that you care and that you're invested in learning more about their culture.
And from there, I am going to tell you a little bit more about the specific evaluation tools that we used and are still actually actively working on. So as Celina mentioned in the last slide, the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI, that was a 75, or that is a 75 question online inventory, and we participated in that prior to going to the Philippines, and we will be repeating that again. That is as she mentioned, you know, it's been demonstrated through research that it has high validity in cross-cultural outcomes in organizations and helping education institutions accomplish their goals of interculturally advancing. We also kept individual journals for reflection while we were in the Philippines. These daily journals were not just writing open thoughts, whatever came to mind. It was more structured than that. The reflection questions were developed and shared prior to leaving for the Philippines. And each day's questions were closely tied to the activities that we were going to experience that day and to the learning outcomes that were expected to happen through those experiences. So we had those questions ahead of time and we reflected on them each evening, kind of really trying to grow through thinking more thoroughly about what we had experienced and how it did or did not help us meet the learning outcomes that we had hoped to achieve that day. We also gathered for group discussions and debrief sessions, as we called them, 3 evenings while we were there. And those also were guided, those discussions were guided by specific questions that we had ahead of time to think about. And of course, as all good extension agents do, we had a Qualtrics survey that we completed when we returned from the Philippines. So first, a few things from our reflection journals. When I combined all of the statements from all of the journals, I had 38 pages of text. So very fortunate to have the assistance of a wonderful university student who sifted through all of that information and tried to pick out a few nuggets to share on our webinar today. And we will have a full report available within a few weeks. So the first piece that I asked her specifically to look for were ideas and insights gained and plans for applying them in our work. And again, these are quotes from our journals that we kept. So you can see there some things about thinking about more interaction between extension and the outreach efforts of the departments in our universities, involving our stakeholders more in the planning and the work that we would do in their communities, integrating students into extension work with local governments, and also increasing collaboration with colleagues from different fields to be more effective. Under another heading of the benefits of participation in an international program and its application to our own work, we heard about, again, the comprehensive planning around climate change and disaster management and trying to share that with our campuses. One participant reported having a new lens to use as I work on programs and how that increased an appreciation for the importance of taking clients' perspectives and needs into account, relating the issues that we work on locally more to those global issues. And lastly, I'll read this one because I think it's especially powerful. This participant wrote, "I've always learned something new that I can apply in my own programming, but most of all, I have a greater respect and understanding of other cultures. This greater understanding enables me to want to do more to help the underserved communities within my own state." And lastly, just a couple words about our Qualtrics survey. The Qualtrics survey asked a lot of different questions, but it led with the 7 statements, with 7 statements around our 7 learning outcomes. And people were asked to use a 5-point scale, starting with strongly agree, somewhat agree, and going down to somewhat disagree or strongly disagree with these statements. And the respondents, those of us who participated in the program, 11 of 12 participants completed the Qualtrics survey. And across these 7 statements, looking at the strongly agree responses, they were ranged from 5 of 11 strongly agreeing up to 10 of 11 who strongly agreed with the statement. And when you combine the strongly agree and somewhat agree together, we had either 10 of 11 or 11 of 11 participants fell into that category every time, except for with 2 exceptions on that bottom statement. So the participants overwhelmingly agreed with these statements of how they increased their knowledge of extension practices and basically we met our learning outcomes.
So I'll talk a little bit about opportunities for the future. If you're interested in consulting or doing extension type volunteer work abroad, consider getting involved in professional development programs such as this one. This type of experiential learning is a precursor to international work because it will help you expand your vision and comfort level of what you already know. An extension study tour can help you develop your cultural competency, which is becoming an important skill as our community demographics across the country are rapidly changing and we need to retool to serve diverse and emerging audiences. You can start by getting support from your extension administration. For example, in Utah, we not only got logistics support by accessing expertise and services of our global engagement program, but also we got paid time off for professional development plus partial funding for travel. Peggy will now tell us a little bit about other sources that you can tap into as members of ESP.
Yes, ESP, if you don't know, we have national scholarships for professional development. They are due every year at on May 1st. And there is a second deadline as well. So in fact, I believe the May deadline is the second one of the year. There is an earlier deadline. So check that out. Right now on the website, you would just find the May deadline because that's the one that's coming up. The other one is already passed for this year. So check that out. There's $4,000 set aside per year for these ESP professional development scholarships that can be up to $1,000 per person. And several of our program participants did receive national ESP scholarships to go to the Philippines. Many of our state chapters also have scholarship programs. I know I received a very nice scholarship from the Wisconsin ESP chapter to support my travel. You might also check on your global or international offices on your campus or for professional development funds. For me, a key piece of this was that I had in my professional development plan that I'm required to write and submit annually, I had stated in that plan very specifically that I wanted to work on developing more cultural competence. And that really made a case and made it easier for me to get funds and support to attend this experience.
So in closing, I will just talk briefly about the Fulbright Specialist Program. And you'll see that we provided a link. You could always Google it too to learn a little more. But basically, this is a program of the U.S. Department of State that is a unique opportunity for U.S. academics and established professionals to engage in 2 to 6 week project-based exchanges that host institutions across the globe. I found out about this program because after we returned, I got an email from a professor at UPLB who made me aware of it. And in fact, she mentioned that currently they're hosting a professor, an extension professor in one of their academic units. And that's how, because she knew this person and she knew that he had gone to the Philippines using this program, that she passed on this information to us. And so we're very pleased to hear that there's more than one way that we can go about looking for opportunities. And I invite you all to think about it and for the future, for us to continue this conversation about how we can make our extension experiences global. And so this ends our panel presentation. So we will now move on to responding to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Peggy, Christy, Celina, and Mark for presenting this most informative session. And as Celina just mentioned, we would like to open the chat box for questions, and we have a couple already. And I'm also going to put the link to the survey, the evaluation, for you to provide some feedback to our presenters and the Professional Development Committee. So, looking at a couple questions in the chat box. Will the PowerPoint be accessible later?
I don't know that the PowerPoint will, but the recording for sure will. We could make the PowerPoint available. We can talk to Greg about that. I think it's more standard probably just to make the recording available though.
And yes, the recording will definitely be up on, as I mentioned earlier, on the ESP website. A question from Jonathan: what kinds of extension activities could be initiated between the US and Philippines?
I will take that question. So one of the purposes of another purpose that was not a stated objective, but that we expected would happen while being there and making one-on-one connections, was for the faculty to connect with individuals that may have similar interests to look into future opportunities, such as a sabbatical, or being able to, through the fellowship program, connect with somebody that has research interest or extension specific interest. So I would say that it is through that experience that you can custom make an experience for somebody wanting to do extension programming in the future or research.
Great, thank you, Celina. Another question was, is there another study tour planned? Our question is from Julie. Thank you for that question.
Well, we have had that question asked even before we left. So since this was our pilot test, you know, we hadn't done this before. I was very pleasantly surprised to see the support that at least here in Utah we got, and how we were able to to sell the idea. Sometimes it's challenging because our administrators may think, you know, we get tax dollars to serve our population. But I think Peggy made an important point that if there's more interest and if we're more in public spaces talking about why we need to be integrated globally, what the value of the program is, if we can continue to promote that idea and how it connects to our professional development, I am hopeful that we can do this. Probably not every year, maybe every other year, because it took us a whole year to get it off the ground.
I would just also like to add the role and support of the National ESP organization from the Global Relations Committee aspect. I'm chair of that committee, and Celina came to me probably hours before I was even officially chairing the committee. She hunted me down at the national meeting and started talking to me about this. So we have it was part of the National Global Relations Committee's plan of work for last year and this year to first of all, just inquire and pull together ideas for this type of a program study, a professional development experience. So it came through, although there were lots of other partners and pieces, it came as it was also part of our Global Relations Committee work. And the ESP National Board also supported this financially, not with a ton of money, but with $500 that we used to make some very small honorariums for some of our hosts in the Philippines that really went above and beyond to make the experience great for us. So the support of the ESP National Board and being part of the official work of the ESP Global Relations Committee, I think, has really strengthened our position in making this available. Also, I also forgot to mention that the ESP National Board contributed funds to really elevate the evaluation of this program, and that's why we had professional evaluation team from the University of Wisconsin who worked with me, and we're going to have a very comprehensive report available for anyone that wants it on the evaluation side. I mean, how we met the learning outcomes that we stated we were going to achieve.
Great, thank you. A few more questions. Sandra wanted to know how it was decided to go to the Philippines. Any chance of going to Australia? And Jessica also asked about how can we find out about other opportunities in different countries. And she mentioned, you know, any opportunities in Japan, for example.
So typically, decisions come down to context and social capital. And that meaning, you know somebody that can make it work. So in our case, the Philippines worked because I had, prior to working here at Utah State University, I taught at Michigan State University, and some of my students were already going to the Philippines as part of an exchange program. So a couple years ago, not just going to visit the students, but also to kind of explore this possibility, I made a trip and made all the contacts and sort of laid out the groundwork to be able to move to this step, you know, from conceptualizing an idea, then bringing back, making contacts, and making it possible. So it depends. It's depending on somebody that can provide the lead and can make it happen. You know, being able to align all the elements. So if somebody has contacts, for example, in Guatemala, which I, you know, been working there for a few years, we could make that work. I know another faculty member has worked in, did a sabbatical in Costa Rica, so she's more than willing to look at an option. Also linking with a university. So these opportunities happen based on somebody that has done all the groundwork. I understand that at the national level, there's a group of folks that are sort of the ones that have the knowledge of these opportunities, and we connected with them. Peggy, who did we have last time from NIFA?
Well, yes, so that I wanted to mention that. So the Global Relations Committee of ESP, we have in our plan of work to connect better with the federal partners and the work that's going on internationally. So we did have John Vierens from the University of Minnesota and Jen Kushner from the University of Wisconsin on one of our calls. And I know we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up this question by saying, as far as knowing more about what opportunities are out there, your best way to do that is connect with the ESP Global Relations Committee, and especially the survey that you're going to be getting. The last question is, do you want to stay in touch with the Global Relations Committee? Put your name and your email address in there, and because we want to provide more information about global and international opportunities to ESP members and chapters. That's a goal of our Global Relations Committee.
Plus, a plug for a session that we're doing during the upcoming conference. Keep an eye on it. There will be a session at National Conference on Opportunities.
Great. Well, we would like to thank everyone for your questions. Wonderful questions. Lynn had asked for the Sustainable Development Goals slide. We'll make that available.
And if anybody, I know just in general, the questions about the PowerPoint, if anybody wants that or some specific slides, contact me. My email address is right here. Well, right here. And I can do that if it's not a ton of people. I can do it individually, because if we do post the PowerPoint, it will just be as a PDF.
Great. Well, again, a reminder that the recording will be on the ESP website. Please complete the evaluation, and thank you so much to the members of the Global Relations Committee. Your presentation was most interesting and enjoyed by all. And thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a wonderful day, stay safe, and take care all.
You ready, guys? Salamat po!
Salamat po!
Salamat